Do you ever feel like the VA system speaks a completely different language than you do? You've got the diagnosis, you've got the pain, you've got the records proving your service connection, and yet the rating comes back low, or maybe even zero. It feels like a massive, confusing black box, right? Today, we're going behind the curtain. I spent years on the other side of that C&P exam table, and I'm going to reveal the 8 critical, often misunderstood factors that truly determine your disability rating. This isn't about how much pain you feel. This is about the highly specific, legalistic, and functional criteria that the VA examiner, the person who holds the key to your future, is trained to look for. If you understand these rules, you stop playing the game based on your pain and start playing based on their rulebook. Stick with me, because what I'm about to tell you will fundamentally change how you approach your next claim, and it starts with the biggest misconception of all. The first thing we need to shatter is the myth that a diagnosis equals disability. This is the single largest pitfall I saw veterans fall into, and it leads to massive disappointment. You walk into the C&P exam proudly presenting records that confirm you have PTSD or degenerative disc disease or migraines. You think, great, the hard part is done. They agree I have the condition. But here is the critical distinction that the VA system hinges upon. A diagnosis is merely the name tag for the illness. A disability, in the eyes of the VA, is the functional impairment caused by that illness. We, as examiners, were never tasked with confirming if you had the diagnosis. That's usually already established by your medical records. Our job was to quantify how much that diagnosis prevents you from working, socializing, or performing daily life activities. Think of it this way. 2 veterans can both have a diagnosis of tinnitus. One veteran experiences a mild ringing that is annoying but easily ignored. The other experiences a roaring in their ears so intense they cannot sleep, concentrate, or hold a conversation. Same diagnosis, wildly different levels of functional disability. The VA doesn't rate the diagnosis, they rate the loss of function. If your claim focuses solely on proving the existence of the condition without detailing, extensively and thoroughly, the resulting functional limitations, you are leaving massive rating potential on the table. This concept must be the foundation of your entire approach. Every sentence you write, every word you speak during the exam must link the medical condition directly to a specific, measurable, and repeatable restriction in your daily life. If you just say, "My back hurts," that's a diagnosis symptom. If you say, "My back pain prevents me from standing for more than 15 minutes, meaning I cannot wash dishes, mow the lawn, or hold a full-time job that requires standing," that is functional impairment. The difference is night and day, and it is the first hurdle the examiner evaluates before moving to the next critical step. Now, let's talk about the C&P exam itself, which many veterans view as a simple doctor's appointment. It is not. It is a highly structured, evidence-gathering mission designed to fill in the gaps for the rating specialist, and the whole process is often a subtle trap if you don't know the rules. The second essential factor is understanding the C&P exam trap, what the examiner is really looking for behind your answers. We are not there to treat you or to be your advocate. We are neutral fact-finders. The examiner is trained to use specific forms, DBQs or disability benefits questionnaires, that mirror the structure of the CFR 38 schedule for rating disabilities. Every question, every physical maneuver is designed to generate data points that map directly to a specific rating percentage. For musculoskeletal conditions, we are focused on range of motion measurements. Did you know that for many joint conditions, the VA rates based on the limitation of motion, not the pain itself? You might have excruciating knee pain, but if your knee can still bend and straighten within the normal range, your rating might be minimal or 0, unless that motion causes pain that prevents tracker further. Functional use. The trap is when veterans minimize their symptoms, or worse, maximize them inconsistently. If you tell the examiner you have crippling anxiety, but then you arrive at the appointment on time, well-groomed, and engage in smooth, prolonged eye contact, the examiner notes that discrepancy. They are looking for consistency between your subjective reporting, what you tell them, and their objective findings, what they observe. The examiner is specifically trained to observe your demeanor, your gait, your hygiene, and your interaction style, and these observations are written down in detail under the Examiner Observations section of the DBQ. If you claim you cannot leave the house due to paranoia, but you drove 45 minutes to the clinic alone, that contradiction will be noted and may severely undermine your credibility. The key to navigating this trap is preparation and honesty, but it must be honesty filtered through the lens of function. Don't just say, "I have nightmares." Explain, "I have nightmares 3 to 4 times a week, which results in fragmented sleep, meaning I wake up exhausted, irritable, and unable to focus, directly impacting my ability to maintain employment." The C&P exam is your stage to demonstrate, not just describe, your functional limitations, ensuring every answer directly feeds the required data points on the DBQ. This brings us directly to the third factor, the almighty CFR 38 Bible, and how the rating schedule ties everything back to functional criteria. The Code of Federal Regulations, specifically Title 38, is the rulebook. Every single disability rating, from 0% to 100%, is defined by highly specific, legalistic language within this schedule. As examiners, we are not guessing. We are matching the data we collect during the C&P exam directly to the criteria listed in the CFR 38. If the veteran's symptoms check the boxes for the 50% criteria, that's the recommendation we must make, regardless of how much we personally sympathize with the veteran's story. Take, for example, mental health ratings. The difference between a 30% rating and a 70% rating is not subjective. It is explicitly defined by the frequency and severity of occupational and social impairment. A 30% rating describes occupational and social impairment with occasional decrease in work efficiency and intermittent periods of inability to perform occupational tasks, but generally functioning satisfactorily. A 70% rating describes occupational and social impairment with deficiencies in most areas, such as work, school, family relations, judgment, thinking, or mood. The examiner is literally looking for evidence to justify those keywords: occasional, intermittent, most areas, deficiencies. If you claim 70% impairment, but your records show you are consistently employed, even if you hate your job, the examiner must weigh that against the 70% criteria. This means you must study the rating schedule for your specific conditions. Understand what the VA considers a 10% impairment versus a 50% impairment. When you go into the exam, you need to be ready to articulate how your symptoms meet or exceed the criteria for the rating you believe you deserve. This is why veterans often get lowballed. They describe 100% pain, but their demonstrated functional limitation only meets the 30% criteria defined in the CFR 38. The CFR 38 is cold, clinical, and objective, and your job is to provide the objective evidence that fits its definitions. Let's dive deeper into the fourth factor, the severity scale, understanding the difference between 10%, 50%, and 100% in concrete, measurable terms. Many veterans believe the scale is linear, where 50% is half the pain of 100%. This is false. The scale is exponential and focuses on the breadth of life affected. A 10% rating generally signifies a mild recurring symptom that requires minimal treatment but doesn't significantly impair employment. Think of mild managed hypertension or occasional joint stiffness. A 50% rating signifies a serious, persistent condition that causes substantial interference with employment and social life. At 50%, the VA recognizes you're struggling to maintain a stable life, but you still possess some capacity for self-care and limited employment. The jump to 70% and 100% is where the criteria become extremely stringent and focused on total occupational impairment. For mental health, 100% requires total occupational and social impairment, often requiring continuous supervision or hospitalization. This means the veteran is essentially unemployable due to the condition. For physical conditions, 100% often requires the loss of use of an extremity, or a condition so debilitating that it requires constant care, like advanced cancer or severe heart failure. What does this mean for your claim strategy? You must clearly define where your condition falls on this severity scale, and you must use evidence, not just feeling, to back it up. If you are claiming a high rating, you must be able to demonstrate a history of job loss, inability to hold relationships, and documented needs for frequent medical intervention. If you are currently employed, especially in a high-stress field, achieving a 70% or 100% rating for a non-P&T condition becomes significantly harder, as the examiner must reconcile your claimed total impairment with your demonstrated occupational stability. The severity scale demands proof of pervasive impairment, not just intense, localized pain. The fifth factor is often the most overlooked by veterans who rely solely on their military medical files: the importance of lay evidence, the veteran's testimony versus the formal medical records. When an examiner reviews your file, we are looking at a snapshot of your medical history, which can often be incomplete, especially if your symptoms were downplayed while you were still in service. Your lay evidence, your personal statements, buddy statements, and spouse statements are absolutely critical because they fill in the historical and current functional gaps that formal records miss. Medical records often just document the diagnosis and the treatment plan. They rarely document the struggle to get out of bed, the avoidance of social situations, or the constant arguments with your partner because of mood swings. This is where lay evidence shines. A medical record might show you had a single appointment for back pain in 2005. Your lay statement should detail how that pain progressed from 2005 to today, detailing every job you had to quit, every time you missed a child's game, and every adaptation you had to make around the house. We, as examiners, are trained to give weight to lay evidence, especially when it is detailed, consistent, and plausible. Plausibility is key. If your buddy statement says you were completely fine until 2018, but your medical records show documented treatment in 2012, that contradiction undermines the credibility of the lay evidence. However, if your lay evidence consistently and graphically describes the functional limitations over time, it can often tip the scales in your favor, especially when the C&P exam findings are borderline. Remember, the examiner is required to consider all evidence in the file, and detailed, persuasive lay statements can often provide the necessary context to push a rating from 30% to 50% by demonstrating the true occupational and social impact. Moving to the sixth factor, we enter a tricky legal space that often causes massive confusion and denials: the aggravation versus direct service connection. Many veterans understand direct service connection. You got hurt doing military stuff, and you have the records to prove it. Simple. But what about conditions that existed before service, or conditions that developed years later? This is where the concept of aggravation comes in, and it's a minefield. Aggravation means that a pre-existing condition, like mild asthma or a minor knee injury, was made permanently worse beyond its natural progression by your military service. The VA doesn't rate the original condition. They rate the increase bunch in disability caused by service. The examiner's task here is to determine the baseline severity before service and the current severity after service, and attribute the difference to military duty. This requires sophisticated medical judgment and often specific medical opinions. If you had mild knee arthritis before service and your service involved heavy, repetitive stress, the examiner must determine if your current severe arthritis is simply the natural progression of the disease or if the military duty permanently accelerated that decline. If the examiner cannot confidently rule out natural progression, the claim may be denied or rated based on a finding of not medically likely that service caused the permanent worsening. For veterans pursuing aggravation claims, your documentation must be hyper-focused on the specific events in service that caused the worsening and how your symptoms immediately escalated following those events. General statements like, "My job was tough," are insufficient. You need to link the specific duty, Omar, carrying 80 moral syllabus packs during 3 10-mile forced marches in extreme heat, directly to the subsequent documented decline in function, differentiating it from the expected aging process. The seventh factor is often the difference between success and a years-long appeals process. The power of the nexus letter when external evidence overrides the C&P exam. The C&P examiner's opinion carries significant weight, but it is not the final word. A well-written, favorable nexus letter from a private physician can often be the most powerful piece of evidence in your file. A nexus letter is a medical opinion that directly links your current disability to your service, often using the critical legal phrase, "at least as likely as not." What makes a nexus letter powerful enough to override a negative C&P exam? Precision and rationale. A strong nexus letter must explicitly review your service treatment records, your current medical records, the examiner's report, if available, and the relevant scientific literature. It must provide a detailed, logical explanation, a rationale for why the private doctor believes the service connection exists, even if the VA examiner disagrees. For example, if the VA examiner claims your current back pain is due to obesity and aging, a strong nexus letter might counter that by stating, "While obesity is a factor, the veteran's documented in-service injury, fall from truck, 1998, caused permanent structural changes, as shown on MRI dated 2022, which are the primary etiology of the current radiculopathy, and this linkage is supported by peer-reviewed literature showing a correlation between early trauma and accelerated disc degeneration." The key is the depth of the rationale. A nexus letter that simply states, "I agree the veteran has PTSD," is worthless. A letter that meticulously details the diagnostic criteria met, the specific stressor event, and why the current functional impairment is 70% based on CFR 38 criteria, is gold. If the evidence is compelling and the rationale is sound, the VA rating specialist is often compelled to prioritize the private medical opinion over the VA examiner's findings, especially if the private doctor reviewed more comprehensive documentation. Finally, we arrive at the eighth and perhaps most actionable factor: the red flags and common mistakes, why claims get denied or lowballed even when the veteran is clearly suffering. From an examiner's perspective, there are several immediate red flags that trigger extra scrutiny. The first is inconsistency. If your claims during the C&P exam do not align with your medical records, your work history, or your lay statements, the examiner is mandated to report that discrepancy. For instance, claiming total occupational impairment while simultaneously running a successful side business is a major red flag. The second is lack of medical continuity. If you claim a condition has been disabling for 10 years, but you have no medical treatment records for 9 of those years, it suggests the condition was either not severe enough to require treatment, or you are exaggerating the duration of the severity. The VA wants to see continuous, albeit sometimes intermittent, treatment. The third red flag is vague reporting. When asked about pain, if you simply say, "It hurts everywhere," or "I don't know," the examiner cannot generate the specific data points needed for the DBQ, EEG pain scale, frequency, location, radiating pain. You must be specific. Another massive mistake is failing to connect secondary conditions. Many high ratings come from secondary service connection, a condition caused or aggravated by a service-connected condition. For example, hypertension caused by severe chronic pain, primary condition, or anxiety caused by the inability to work due to physical limitations. If you don't explicitly claim and document the nexus for the secondary condition, the examiner will only rate the primary condition, leaving significant compensation unclaimed. The biggest mistake of all? Failing to prepare the narrative. The VA process is a legal argument supported by medical evidence. If you walk into that C&P exam without a clear, rehearsed, and documented narrative that links your service event to your current functional limitation, you are relying entirely on the examiner to piece together a favorable claim from fragmented evidence, and that is a gamble you cannot afford to take. So, let's bring this all back into focus. You are not just a patient, you are an applicant presenting a case. The VA examiner is not your doctor, they are the judge's fact finder. To succeed in this complex system, you must shift your perspective from feeling pain to proving functional limitation. You must understand that a diagnosis is only the starting line. You must treat the C&P exam as a highly structured data-gathering event, ensuring your testimony consistently and explicitly maps to the CFR 38 criteria for the rating you seek. You need to leverage detailed lay evidence to bridge the gaps in your official records, and you must be prepared to address the nuances of aggravation versus direct connection. If the C&P examiner misses the mark, you have the power of a strong nexus letter to introduce overriding medical evidence. Stop focusing solely on your pain and start focusing on the functional consequences of that pain. The jobs lost, the relationship strained, the inability to perform basic life tasks. That is the language the VA speaks, and mastering it is the only way to ensure your disability rating accurately reflects the sacrifices you made. The system is complex, but it is navigable if you know the rules. Go review the CFR 38 today, prepare your functional statements, and approach your next claim not as a plea for help, but as a presentation of undeniable evidence.